Let me ask you something uncomfortable. What if the way you think about job security right now, the stability you feel because you have a steady paycheck, a solid employer, maybe your 401k you're contributing to? What if that feeling isn't security at all? What if it's just familiarity dressed up as security? And what if there is an entire generation of Americans who figured that out the hard way, rebuilt their financial lives around that truth, and quietly became the highest net worth working age generation in the country, while everyone else was still following the rules that failed them? Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980, 44 to 59 years old today. According to Federal Reserve data, they currently hold 25% of total American household wealth, more than millennials and Gen Z combined, despite being a smaller generation. Nobody is making documentaries about them. Nobody is writing think pieces about their habits. They are just quietly there, in the background of every financial conversation, having already solved problems the rest of us are still arguing about online. And here is the question this video is really asking. Is Gen X wealthy because they got lucky with timing, or did they figure out something true about money that you have not figured out yet? Something you've been actively avoiding because it would require you to rethink everything you currently believe about how your financial life is supposed to work. Stay with me, because by the end of this, the thing that will bother you most is not what Gen X went through, it's how much of what they stopped believing you are still treating as fact. Here is the assumption almost every working American carries right now, usually without ever saying it out loud. If I keep my job, pay my bills on time, and avoid obvious financial mistakes, I will be okay. That's the operating system running underneath most people's financial decisions. Not a strategy exactly, more like a background belief, a sense that stability is the goal, and that stability comes from maintaining what you already have. Gen X had that exact belief, and then they watched it get surgically removed from the people who deserved it most, not through personal failure, not through bad decisions, through a quiet, deliberate corporate restructuring of the American economy that started in the early 1980s and never actually stopped. Here's what that looked like from ground level. Between 1979 and 1983, American corporations eliminated approximately 2.4 million manufacturing jobs, not because those companies were failing, but because Wall Street had discovered that downsizing boosted quarterly earnings, and quarterly earnings moved stock prices, and stock prices determined executive compensation. The people being laid off had done nothing wrong. Many of them had 20-year tenures. Some had turned down competing offers out of loyalty. They got a box and a parking lot anyway. And the children watching this happen, the ones who would become Generation X, absorbed a lesson that no financial advisor has ever been able to undo. The feeling of stability and the reality of stability are two completely different things, and institutions will let you confuse them for as long as it is profitable. Now here's where this becomes about you. Pull up your financial life right now in your head. How much of what you call a plan is actually just a single income source that you have made peace with? How much of what you call security is actually just the absence of an immediate crisis? Because Gen X didn't get financially resilient by working harder inside the system that failed them. They got resilient by looking at that system clearly and building something parallel to it, something the system couldn't touch. Cerulli Associates data shows Gen X has the highest rate of self-directed financial management of any generation. They are the least likely to outsource their financial decisions to advisors, institutions, or anyone else operating on a different set of incentives than their own. That is not stubbornness. That is what clarity looks like after the illusion breaks. The question is, what would you do differently if you stopped mistaking familiarity for safety? Let's talk about something the personal finance industry will never say directly because the entire industry is structured around it. Having one job, even a great one, even a well-paying one at a stable company, is not a financial plan. It is a financial vulnerability with a monthly deposit attached to it. Gen X didn't read that in a book. They watched their parents' colleagues get walked out of buildings after decades of service. They graduated into a labor market that was actively teaching employers that loyalty was a cost center, not an obligation. And so, by the time Federal Reserve researchers started mapping generational income behavior in the late 1990s, something unusual had already started appearing in the Gen X data. They were holding day jobs and building secondary income streams at rates significantly higher than boomers had at the same age, not because they were more entrepreneurial by nature, but because they had internalized something fundamental,
A single income source is not a plan, it is a single point of failure.
Here's the pattern interruption. We talk about this behavior today as side hustles and package it in productivity content and morning routine videos. We make it sound aspirational, like it's about freedom and passion and being your own boss. Gen X didn't frame that way at all. They framed it as basic structural logic. If one bridge is the only way across the river, and you've already watched that bridge collapse under someone else, you build a second bridge before you need it. The rental property isn't a dream. The consulting income isn't a passion project. It's load-bearing infrastructure for a life that learned it cannot afford a single point of failure. Now apply that to your own situation right now. If your employer called you tomorrow and told you your position was being eliminated effective in 30 days, how long would you be okay? Most Americans, according to a 2023 Federal Reserve survey, could not cover a $400 emergency expense without borrowing. $400. That is not a savings problem. That is a structural problem. It's what happens when an entire culture organizes its financial life around one income source and calls it stability. Gen X lifted that structure, watched it fail in real time, and quietly started building exits while everyone else was still trusting the main entrance. The question is not whether you should do the same. The question is why you haven't started yet. This one is going to feel counterintuitive, and I want you to sit with it rather than dismiss it. Gen X spends more money on experiences, concerts, travel, live events, than any other American generation in raw dollar terms, according to Eventbrite consumer research. More than millennials who built an entire cultural identity around experience spending. More than boomers who have the highest net worth and the most disposable income. Gen X, in actual dollars, leads every other generation in spending on things that disappear the moment they're over. And the instinct, when you hear that, is to read it as contradiction. These are the same people with the highest savings rates, the most complex income diversification, the deepest financial anxiety, and they're blowing money on concerts, on trips, on events that leave nothing behind? That instinct is exactly wrong, and understanding why it's wrong will teach you more about wealth psychology than most personal finance content ever will. Gen X watched two separate economic events destroy the value of physical assets. In the corporate downsizing era, they watched retirement accounts tied to company stock evaporate when the companies restructured. In 2008, they watched home values, the thing American culture told them was the most reliable store of value possible, drop 30% in 18 months. According to Pew Research Center data, Gen X lost a median of 45% of their total wealth during the financial crisis. They were between 28 and 48 years old enough to have built something real, young enough that the loss was not abstract. It was the scoreboard proof that the rules they had followed were working, suddenly wiped out. What does a generation learn from that? Not that saving is pointless, not that investing is foolish. They learned something more precise. That the things our culture treats as reliable stores of value, property, possessions, physical assets, are only as reliable as the system that assigns them value. And that system has a documented history of reassigning that value without warning or apology. But a weekend in New Orleans with people you love, a live show you've been waiting years to see, nobody can reappraise that. No market correction can repo a memory. No recession changes what something meant to you when it happened. This is not sentimentality. This is a rational response to watching physical assets fail as a store of value, twice. And it raises a genuinely uncomfortable question for the rest of us. How much of what you are buying right now, the car upgrade, the furniture, the house renovation, how much of that are you actually treating as wealth? And how much of it will the next market correction remind you was never really yours to keep? Here's a belief that runs through almost every mainstream personal finance conversation in America. Debt is the enemy. Pay it off, all of it, get to zero and stay there. Dave Ramsey built an empire on this idea. It has helped millions of people stop digging holes they couldn't climb out of. And for a specific kind of debt, it is completely correct. But Gen X quietly operates on a more sophisticated framework, and the data makes it look paradoxical at first glance. Experience consumer debt analysis shows Gen X carries the highest total household debt of any American generation right now, more than millennials who are actively in the home buying years, more than boomers.
The generation most defined by financial anxiety and distrust of systems carries the most debt. And yet, they also have strong savings rates, the second highest 401k contribution rates according to the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies, and a net worth trajectory that has outpaced every younger generation.
How do you carry the most debt and build the most wealth at the same time? Because they are not actually afraid of debt. They are afraid of a specific kind of debt, the kind that has no finish line. And recognizing the difference between those two things is one of the most underrated financial skills that almost nobody explicitly teaches. Walk through the logic the way Gen X actually applies it. A 30-year fixed mortgage on a rental property has a known payment, a known endpoint, and a cash-flowing asset on the other side of it. You can build a spreadsheet around it. You can model it from start to finish on day one. That is not chaos. That is leverage. A business loan structured against projected revenue with a clear repayment timeline is calculable risk. You know what you're taking on. But a revolving credit card balance? That has no natural endpoint. It compounds in the background of your life, expanding quietly whenever financial pressure increases, never resolving itself, always requiring more than it seems to. The lesson they internalized was not never borrow. It was never borrow without being able to see the last payment from the first one. That distinction between structured leverage and open-ended financial quicksand is something most people never consciously develop. They either avoid all debt out of fear or they accumulate it without a framework. Gen X landed on something more precise, and it's available to anyone willing to stop treating debt as a single category and start asking the only question that actually matters. Can I see the finish line from here? Last one, and this might be the most relevant to where you are right now in your own financial life. The belief that being a committed, loyal, long-term employee is a financial strategy, that showing up consistently, building a reputation, investing in your relationship with your employer, that this creates something durable, something that protects you. Gen X was the generation that stress-tested this belief against reality at scale, and the results were not ambiguous. An Adobe study on generational brand behavior found something that looks like a paradox on the surface. Gen X is 34% more likely than millennials to stay loyal to brands they've trusted since early adulthood, even when cheaper alternatives exist. But job mobility data consistently shows they are significantly more willing than boomers were at the same career stage to leave employers, without guilt, without long deliberation, and without the cultural shame that previous generations attached to not staying put. They will drive across town to support a local business that has been honest with them for 15 years. They will leave a Fortune 500 company via a 2-week notice email without losing sleep. That is not inconsistency. That is one of the clearest and most coherent value systems any generation has ever built around trust. Institutions, corporations, financial systems, pension administrators, they proved that their commitments are conditional on their own financial interests. When keeping a promise became inconvenient, they restructured, downsized, and handed out form letters. People, small businesses, and brands with genuine track records did not do that. So Gen X redirected their loyalty precisely. Not less loyalty, more precise loyalty. Loyalty reserved exclusively for things that had demonstrated they deserved it. The financial implication of this for you right now is direct. Every year you stay in an environment that undervalues you because you are building towards something is a year you are extending credit to an institution with a documented history of not paying it back. Gen X learned that lesson by watching it happen to people they loved. You have the advantage of watching it happen to an entire generation before you. The question is whether you're going to use that information or whether you're going to keep calling institutional familiarity by the name it doesn't deserve: security. Here is what Gen X actually is, stripped of everything else. They are the first American generation to be handed a set of financial beliefs, watch those beliefs fail publicly and repeatedly, and rebuild from the wreckage, without a roadmap and without the option of pretending the system still worked. They didn't read their way out of those beliefs. They got burned out of them. And the uncomfortable truth is that every single lie we decoded today is still running inside your financial decisions right now, in the assumptions underneath your plan, in the things you haven't questioned because questioning them would be inconvenient.
One of the deepest of those, the one that keeps more people stuck than almost anything else, is the belief that your salary is your foundation. It isn't. We already broke down exactly why in a previous Dollar Decoded video. Watch that one next. Link is on screen. If this hit differently, like the video so it reaches the right people and subscribe to Dollar Decoded. We decode the psychology, the systems, and the real mechanics behind wealth, so you stop reacting to your finances and start understanding them, one video at a time. See you in the next one.